Ladies and gentlemen, Lord Mayors in particular, and Lady Mayoress, it's good to be in your company this afternoon, isn't it? And I want to thank you very much indeed for the welcome. Which brings us actually to an extraordinary place. When you think of it, this place really speaks, doesn't it? It speaks and it reeks of a time when Belfast, this place, was the centre, the engine of industry and commerce for the entire island of Ireland. Now that world, the smokestack industries and the busy harbour and that life has faded. We now have the second industrial revolution. Belfast was the doyen of the first industrial revolution, but you're in the business of making it the doyen of the next industrial revolution. And please goodness, as we stand in this place and set our faces towards that future, you will be the people who help to make that happen. I feel very privileged to be here. Thank you, and thank you for the lovely words that you have spoken. I want to say a special thank you because the invitation originally to come here came from Angela Brady. So thanks to Christine for her lovely words. And of course, Angela and I share a legal history in common. Angela's a former student of mine, and I know, hard to accept, isn't it? But anyway. I've got over it because I have students now who are presidents of universities, so I've actually got over all that, but just about. Actually, when I got Angela's invitation to speak today, I was just thinking of the very different generations that we represent, because when I started law school at the end of the 1960s, don't do the maths, and in particular, Wendy Austin, don't you do the maths, because you were there too, and. When we started law at the end of the 1960s in Queen's, we were among a very, very, very tiny minority of law students. Women were a small and very distinguished bunch, but very small bunch. And indeed within the university generally, women were in a minority. But actually, one of the main law texts that we were given, I don't know, I'm sure it happened with you too, Wendy, but because Wendy was a little bit younger than me. But when we were starting law school, we were given a text by a very eminent jurist called Glanville Williams, and it told us emphatically in a chapter that was entitled Women, there was absolutely no corresponding chapter entitled Men, needless to remark, but that there was no place for us in law, unless, of course, we were looking for husbands. Otherwise, we were wasting our time, the book said, because, first of all, if we wanted to be barristers, our voices didn't carry in court like men's. I never heard my mother. And the other thing was that if we wanted to be solicitors, that was absolutely impossible because the clients rightly distrusted us. So when I was called to the bar in 1974, 5 years later, there were no women practising at the Northern Ireland Bar at all at that time. And ironically, on our call day, when 3 of us had the temerity to decide we were going to attempt to practice, at least 3 out of the 14 or 15 who were called to the bar that day, we were each then presented by the Lord Chief Justice, completely tongue-in-cheek, I'm sure, with a hardbound copy of the very book that was telling us that what were we doing there in the first place. So that wasn't a very encouraging start to a career, I can tell you. But we were a stubborn lot, and actually by the time that Angela's generation reached the university, it was very, very different. Then the numbers had started to equalise, and now you saw quite a large number of women coming into the law faculty, the medical faculty, everywhere except the engineering faculty. We're still working on that one. But they were coming in large numbers. And of course today, if you go into a law school, well, you'd really, really, really now want to send in a squad to find the men, because law schools now are dominated by women, 70%, I guess, in most places now, same in medical schools. So they're coming through in large numbers, and of course, generally throughout university, any university, you'll find that women are by far in a majority. So today, things have changed, and we've come actually an extraordinary journey in what has been a very condensed period of time, from those infuriating, paralysing days when women regularly and routinely would have heard words like, "You can't because you're a woman." Now, I think of the Lady Mayoress of Ards today, who is here, and who has a phenomenal career behind her as a businesswoman and as a managing director of a company and chief executive of a company. But a very unusual road in those days, a very, very, very unusual road, and a very lonely road, I would have thought, in many ways. But for the most part, you were unique. You were one of the pioneers who has to go down that obstacle course that was designed in many ways to keep women out of the kind of work that you did. But we'll never know. I don't suppose we'll ever be able to figure out just what the colossal extent to which we were deprived in so many ways of the genius of women, the full flood of the genius of women, because of that waste of talent and that mentality that deprived women of so many opportunities to really let themselves shine. But we're in a different generation now, and we're at the beginning, and we have to keep pinching ourselves to remember we are just at the beginning of seeing what happens when the talent base of women, that comprehensive talent base, is actually used comprehensively and not corralled narrowly. When women take their place as equals, in actually not just in business, but in politics, in the arts, and in every sphere of what we call civic society. One of the very best places in the world at the moment to see what happens when the old barriers of gender bias come down is actually Ireland, because underpinning the economic success story, particularly the so-called Celtic Tiger economy, is the story of women, and in particular women who have taken advantage of education. In the Republic, unlike Northern Ireland, free second-level education didn't come to the end of the 1960s. It came here at the end of the 1940s. And so it's no surprise then, end of the 1960s comes free second-level education. It is no surprise that at the beginning of the 1990s, when you have created this critical mass of highly educated people who have now gone into university, and they just don't want to emigrate, because that's what everybody else has been doing for generations, and they start saying clever things like, we can't be this stupid, how come we can't do better than this? And they start to apply their brains to the problems. And it's no accident, of course, that at that very moment you begin to see an enormous change in the role played by women in a much broader sphere than historically. Now, over 60% of all women are now working outside the home. It's a massive, massive change from 2 decades ago. We're not talking thousands, we are talking hundreds of thousands of women now in the workplace who were simply not there 20 years ago. So their genius, their way of looking at things, their perspective, their take on things is feeding through so many areas now, into so many places and spaces where it was absent before. And since they arrived in the workplace, a once very poor and underachieving society has in barely 1 generation turned the tide of history completely. The huge problems that once beset it have, for the most part, been transcended or are in the process of being transcended. A century and a half of outward migration disappeared, now replaced by net inward migration. And it's very interesting that the people who are coming to Ireland today are even better educated on average than the people of Ireland, which is saying something because the average level of education is very, very high here. So once endemic high unemployment, Martin and I remember the 1980s, high unemployment, 20%, given way now to virtually full employment. What was an unindustrialised, very low-grade agricultural economy, and I'm speaking here now, of course, about the South, because the North was different. The South of Ireland missed the Industrial Revolution by a very large Irish mile. Insofar as the Industrial Revolution was captured, the first Industrial Revolution was captured in Ireland, it was here in Belfast, largely, that it was captured. But what was a very unindustrialised, low-grade, low-added value agricultural economy has now given way to this very sophisticated, high-tech, globalised economy where 80% of everything that is manufactured, and it's high-value manufacturing now, is exported right around the world. There isn't a corner of the globe that they're not exporting to. So Ireland's become a leader in the second industrial revolution. Inward investors, we know, have made a very formidable contribution to these changed times. Low corporation tax, another outcome of the applied genius. The model of social partnership, a particularly important model because it gave us industrial stability. The talented workforce, all of these things combined to create the set of circumstances in which the Celtic Tiger could begin to flourish.